Good morning, boys and girls. We have a new chapter of Farmer Boy to read today, which is called The Turn of the Year. So we have been in the winter season in Farmer Boy for a while, and we're going to hear about the shift as it's starting to get kind of towards springtime very soon. We're actually going to end up covering all of the seasons. So I think the book probably started in like around January, and as it continues, the days get longer and longer, which ends up being important in this chapter. But the days get longer after winter solstice, which is in December. But actually, it gets colder and colder, which you probably noticed because we had that really, really cold time. In January and February is when it's been especially cold. Specifically, February has been really bad. So January and February are getting closer and closer to spring. However, they're the coldest time of the year for most people. And obviously it depends on the northern or southern hemisphere for which ones are experiencing winter. But for the northern hemisphere, it's December that we have the solstice, and then it gets colder and colder until it's springtime. Thankfully, it seems like we're finally in springtime. So that is what we're going to hear about in our chapter today, the turn of the year. So the days were growing longer, but the cold was more intense. Father said, "When the days begin to lengthen, the cold begins to strengthen." Can you say that? When the days begin to lengthen, the cold begins to strengthen. Which means after winter solstice, after that time in December for us, the days are getting longer. We're seeing more sunlight, but it's also getting colder. At last, after all this, the snow softened a little on the south and west slopes. At noon, the icicles dripped. So it seems like they are maybe around the same time of year as it is for us, March, where we just had some really snowy, icy times, but it seems like it's warming up. Sap was rising in the trees, and it was time to make sugar. Now, in the cold mornings, just before sunrise, Almanzo and Father set out to the maple grove. Father had a big wooden yoke on his shoulders, and Almanzo had a little yoke. From the ends of the yokes hung strips of moosewood bark with large iron hooks on them, just like this. So there's that yoke. This one is not used to join animals together. It has a bucket on it. From the ends of the yokes hung strips of moosewood bark with large iron hooks on them, and a big wooden bucket swung from each hook. In every maple tree, Father had bored a small hole and fitted a little wooden spout into it. Sweet maple sap was dripping from the spouts into small pails. Going from tree to tree, Almanzo emptied the sap into his big buckets. The weight hung from his shoulders, but he steadied the buckets with his hands to keep them from swinging. So they're getting sap from the tree, a maple tree, and what do you think they're going to make with it? Maybe some maple syrup, maybe they'll use maple sugar for some things. So they're getting that from the trees to be able to use for some sort of sweetener. Now, when they were full, he went to the great cauldron and emptied them into it. Have any of you all seen a cauldron before? A cauldron is a very large pot used for boiling liquids. Like you can see here. They pronounce it, or they spell it C-A-U-L-D-R-O-N, but this one spells it this way. So there's a cauldron. So they're bringing the sap over to the cauldron to boil it. Now, the huge cauldron hung from a pole set between two trees. Father kept a bonfire blazing under it to boil the sap. Almanzo loved trudging through the frozen wildwoods. He walked on snow that had never been walked on before. Oh, I love that. And only his own tracks followed behind him. Busily, he emptied the little pails into the buckets, and whenever he was thirsty, he drank some of the thin, sweet, icy cold sap. He liked to go back to the roaring fire. He poked it and saw sparks fly. Do any of you guys like going to bonfires and doing that? It can be pretty fun. He warmed his face and hands in the scorching heat and smelled the sap boiling. Then he went into the woods again. At noon, all the sap was boiling in the cauldron. Father opened the lunch pail, and Almanzo sat on the log beside him. They ate and talked. Their feet were stretched out to the fire, and a pile of logs was at their backs. All around them were snow and ice and wild woods, but they were snug and cozy. After they had eaten, Father stayed by the fire to watch the sap, but Almanzo hunted wintergreen berries. Now, under the snow on the south slopes, the bright red berries were ripe among their thick green leaves. Almanzo took off his mittens and pawed away the snow with his bare hands. He found the red clusters and filled his mouth full of them. The cold berries crunched between his teeth, gushing out their aromatic juices. Nothing else was ever so good as wintergreen berries dug out of the snow. Almanzo's clothes were covered with snow. His fingers were stiff and red with cold. But he never left a south slope until he had pawed it all over. When the sun was low behind the maple trunks, Father threw snow on the fire, and it died in sizzles and steam. Then Father dipped the hot syrup into the buckets. He and Almanzo set their shoulders against the yokes again, under the yokes again, and carried the buckets home. They poured the syrup into Mother's big brass kettle on the cook stove. Then Almanzo began the chores while Father fetched the rest of the syrup from the woods. After supper, the syrup was ready to sugar off. What does that mean? Now, Mother ladled it into 6-quart milk pans and left it to cool. We're going to talk about quarts pretty soon as we hear about, instead of the metric system of measurement, the standard system of measurement. So actually I've got a little thing here that might show quart. Actually, these are too small. A quart is larger than that, twice as large as that. So, and it was a 6-quart milk pan, so pretty big. In the morning, every pan held a big cake of solid maple sugar. Mother dumped out the round golden brown cakes and stored them on the top pantry shelves. Day after day, the sap was running, and every morning, Almanzo went with Father to gather and boil it. Every night, Mother sugared it off. So, sugaring it off sounds like she is letting it cool, this syrup that's been boiled already, and then it cools down to become like a sugar. So every night she sugared it off. They made all the sugar they could use next year. Sorry, just a second. Then the last boiling of syrup was not sugared off. It was stored in jugs down cellar, and that was the year's syrup. So they're using most of it to become sugar, but they're leaving some just to be maple syrup, sorry. Then Alice came home from school. She smelled Almanzo, and she cried out, "Oh, you've been eating wintergreen berries." Someone's jealous. She thought it wasn't fair that she had to go to school while Almanzo gathered sap and ate wintergreen berries. She said, "Boys have all the fun." She made Almanzo promise that he wouldn't touch the south slopes along Trout River beyond the sheep pasture. Girls have a lot of fun, right, girls? But she's feeling jealous in that moment because some of these are kind of boy jobs that all the boys go off and do, and she's not able to. So she's a little jealous. So on Saturdays, they went together to paw over these slopes. When Almanzo found a red cluster, he yelled. And when Alice found one, she squealed. And sometimes they divided, and sometimes they didn't. So it seems like they get along pretty well. Now, Almanzo and Eliza Jane is another story, but Almanzo does get along with Alice. But they went on their hands and knees all over those south slopes, and they ate wintergreen berries all afternoon. Now, Almanzo brought home a pailful of the thick green leaves, and Alice crammed them into a big bottle. Mother filled the bottle with whiskey and set it away. That was her wintergreen flavoring for cakes and cookies. Wintergreen flavoring, interesting. I'm not sure exactly what that would taste like. What do you think wintergreen flavoring would taste like? So you've probably seen pictures of like the berry, kind of like cranberries is probably what these berries look like, with kind of holly leaves. This might be something kind of similar, at least looking. Now, every day the snow was melting a little. The cedars and spruces shook it off, and it fell in blobs from the bare branches of oaks and maples and beeches. All along the walls of barns and house, the snow was pitted with water falling from the icicles. And finally, the icicles fell crashing. So it's starting to warm up. Spring is coming. The earth showed in wet, dark patches here and there. The patches spread. Only the trodden paths were still white, and a little snow remained on the north side, on the north sides of buildings and wood piles. On the north side, so it's getting less sun. You know how when we had the huge snow, there were certain places where snow would just keep piled up for a long, long time. Now then the winter term of school ended and spring had come. One morning, Father drove to Malone. Before noon, he came hurrying home and shouted the news from the buggy. The New York potato buyers were in town. So this was big news for them. They, make things for themselves, but they also have like these potatoes that they're growing to sell off. Now, Royal ran to help hitch the team to the wagon. Alice and Almanzo ran to get bushel baskets from the woodshed. They rolled them bumpity-bump down the cellar stairs and began filling them with potatoes as fast as they could. They filled 2 baskets before Father drove the wagon to the kitchen porch. Here they are, filling potatoes in their baskets. Who do you think that is? It's probably Royal. And then there's Almanzo. He looks like he's shorter. And then over there, little Alice. Then the race began. Father and Royal hurried the baskets upstairs and dumped them into the wagon. And Almanzo and Alice hurried to fill more baskets faster than they were carried away. Almanzo tried to fill more baskets than Alice, but he couldn't. She worked so fast that she was turning back to the bin while her hoop skirts were still whirling the other way. When she pushed back her curls, her hands left smudges on her cheeks. Almanzo laughed at her dirty face, and she laughed at him. Look at yourself in the glass, meaning the mirror. You're dirtier than I be. They kept the baskets full. Father and Royal never had to wait. Good for them. They are working hard, having fun while they're doing it too. When the wagon was full, Father drove away in a hurry. It was mid-afternoon before he came back, but Royal and Almanzo and Alice filled the wagon again while he ate some cold dinner and he hauled another load away. That night, Alice helped Royal and Almanzo do the chores. Father was not there for supper. He did not come before bedtime. Royal sat up to wait for him. Late in the night, Almanzo heard the wagon, and Royal went out to help Father curry and brush the tired horses who had done 20 miles of hauling that day. Wow. The next morning and the next, so that kind of reminds me of Black Beauty again, of when Black Beauty worked so hard. Some of his good owners would treat him really, really well. Now, the next morning and the next, they all began loading by candlelight. So they're even doing it at nighttime. And Father was gone with the first load before sunrise. On the third day, the potato train left for New York City. But all Father's potatoes were on it. They sold a bunch of potatoes to this New York seller or New York buyer. 500 bushels at $1 a bushel. He made $500 just on selling potatoes. That's a lot for this time. I told you when potatoes were cheap last fall that they'd be high in the spring. It was $500 in the bank. They were all so proud of Father, who raised good potatoes and knew so well when to store them and when to sell them. That's a big part of farming. You have to know when to do everything, what's the right timing of when to sell them, when to store them, when, to take them out of the earth. Mother said, "That's pretty good." Beaming, they all felt happy. But later, Mother said, "Well, now that's off our hands. We'll start house cleaning tomorrow, bright and early." So they're going to do some spring cleaning. Do any of your families do this? A lot of people every spring do a big, deep clean. There's some cleaning that has to be done all the time, either every day or once a week. But some of the spring cleaning might not be something that happens all the time. Like shampooing the carpets or cleaning the windows of the house and maybe painting some things outside, repainting parts of the house. So spring cleaning is like a deeper clean. Almanzo hated house cleaning. He had to pull up carpet tacks all around the edges of miles of carpet. Then the carpets were hung on clotheslines outdoors, and he had to beat them with a long stick. When he was little, he had run under the carpets playing that they were tents. So these carpets apparently are easy to like take on and off, almost like a rug, but they do have them tacked down. But now that he was 9 years old, he had to beat those carpets without stopping. So they didn't have vacuum cleaners. This is really their way of cleaning the carpets. They have to beat out all the dust and stuff that got stuck in it till no more dust would come out of them. Everything in the house was moved. So they move all the furniture so that they can do a deep clean underneath. Everything was scrubbed and scoured and polished. All the curtains were down. All the feather beds were outdoors airing. All the blankets and quilts were washed. From dawn to dark, Almanzo was running, pumping water, fetching wood, spreading clean straw on the scrubbed floors, and then helping to stretch the carpets over it, and then tacking all those edges down again. Days and days he spent in the cellar. He helped Royal empty the vegetable bins. They sorted out every spoiled apple and carrot and turnip, and put back the good ones into a few bins that Mother had scrubbed. They took down the other bins and stored them in the woodshed. They carried out crocks and jars and jugs till the cellar was almost empty. Then Mother scrubbed the walls and floor. Royal poured water into pails of lime, and Almanzo stirred the lime till it stopped boiling and was whitewash. Then they whitewashed the whole cellar. That was fun. "Mercy on us," Mother said when they came upstairs. "Did you get as much whitewash on the cellar as you got on yourselves?" Uh-oh. So it looks like they are covered in whitewash. The whole cellar was fresh and clean and snow white once it dried. Mother moved her milk pans down to the scrubbed shelves. The butter tubs were scoured white with sand and dried in the sun, and Almanzo set them in a row on the clean cellar floor to be filled with the summer's butter. Outdoors, the lilacs and the snowball bushes were in bloom. Violets and buttercups were blossoming in the green pastures. Birds were building their nests, and it was time to work in the fields. So they've kind of gotten everything covered on the inside of the house. They've got a lot of things stored up from the winter that they needed, like ice and maple syrup. Now it's time for the spring chores. So tomorrow's chapter is called Springtime, and we're going to hear about some of the things that need to be done in the fields once the weather warms up and all the snow is gone. So farmers have different seasons. They're all busy seasons. But the Wilder family has different things that they do once it's springtime. Hope that you're enjoying. That is all for today, and I will see you all very soon. Have a wonderful day.